Good morning, guys, and welcome to this lecture. So today we're going to just be doing an overview of C# and ASP.NET Core, the ASP.NET Core web framework. So in our last video, we had an introduction to web development, and I showed you how to create a controller, how to create an action. I showed you what URLs to enter in the browser to hit your action, and how to display view, then how to do some basic calculation. And that really, so what you can do now is you can always create a new project and you can add a view and add a controller action and get it to work. But as you might have seen, there were a lot of files in that project that we did not touch at all, and I would like to address them in this video. So just go through them one by one and explain what each of them does, so you just kind of get like this broad overview of what things are doing. Alright, so first of all, I would like to, so I hear a lot of people ask questions like, oh, is C# a modern language? Should I be learning C# now, or C# is legacy? And I just felt like I would take a few minutes to debunk that claim. I have the Tube index here. So the Tube index is like a ranking of programming languages. So it ranks programming languages by their popularity, by the activity, by the usage, and all of that. And this is a monthly ranking, right? So I have the Tube ranking for May 2020 here, and we can see the list of programming language. We have C# at number 5. So as of May 2019, in May 2019, it was actually at number 6. But May 2020, it's up to number 5, which is a good place to be at. So it's the only language ahead of it is C, Java, Python, and C++. Now these are languages that existed a long time before C#, so it's understandable that they have more popularity and they have more usage. But C# coming in at number 5, and we see from this arrow that it is actually increasing. So C#'s usage is increasing. Even today that people say, oh, no one does C# anymore and all of that. So this is clearly not true according to this ranking. And we see that C# ranks higher than JavaScript, than PHP, than Go, and some other languages that you see people talk about, so like Ruby or Perl. And you see that some of these languages are even decreasing in use and popularity. So we see another Microsoft language made entry at number 6, Visual Basic. So Visual Basic used to be like the programming language for desktop applications. We see that a lot of people are still using Visual Basic, even though its use is declining now. And the reason the users is declining is because most Visual Basic developers are now coding in C#. We see JavaScript at number 7, and in May 2019 it was at number 7, and it's still at number 7 today. So it's really, even though there's a lot of rave and all of that, it really isn't doing so much more better than the other languages if you look at it. So according to this stat, C# is doing better than JavaScript, even though JavaScript has a lot of noise and a very loud community, if I may say. So that is one way to look at the growth of C#. Another way would be to let's look at the ASP.NET Core's website. And one way to measure the performance of a web development framework like ASP.NET Core or like Node.js is to really look at, okay, what is the speed of these frameworks? How many requests can we process at a time? Now, what is a request? When you type in a URL in your browser and you hit enter, a message is sent to your browser that, hey, this person wants to view this page, right? That is a request. So you are making a request to your web server. Now imagine millions of people all over the world typing in www.google.com. They are making a request to Google's server. Now, one way to measure a web development framework performance is looking at how many requests can it handle in a second. How many requests can it handle in a second? So how many requests will it handle in a second before it starts having problems, or starts having performance issues, or slowing down, or not responding to some of them? So here we see that Java servlet apps can handle 2.5 million requests per second. That is a lot of requests. So if 2.5 million people are using a website or an API built with Java, it's not going to have any problems with that. It can handle 2.5 million requests every second. And then we look at Node.js. Node.js can barely handle 1 million. Node.js is built on JavaScript and it can barely handle 1 million requests per second, which is really low. Now we look at .NET, which is ASP.NET Core, C# and the rest, and we see that it can handle 6.97 million requests per second, which far outshines these two. So if you're building an application that has to be highly available and performance is one of your main goals, C# is one of the clear, .NET Core is one of the clear winners here. It's modern, it has been rewritten for the modern web, and it's just blazing fast. So I just thought I would drop that in. And this is why you see a lot of corporates use .NET, even though the hippie developer community might not like .NET, but the truth is it gets the job done, and that is why people use it. It's secure, it's safe, it's performant, and come on, it's handling double the amount of requests any of these can handle per second. So really, why not .NET? So that said, I'm going to create a new web application and just go into it and kind of just show you all the parts of it. So at .NET new MVC, I'll give it a name. I'll call it demo web application. So .NET new MVC and demo web application. I'll hit enter and wait for it to restore the Node.js packages and create the project and all of that. Alright, great. We see that it's ready. So I'll just go cd demo web application. I'll hit enter, and then I'll say code dot just to open it in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to make my window a little bigger. I hope this is big enough. And we're just going to start with these files, right? We're going to start from the lowest, so and just go upwards from there and look at each of the folders and each of the files and just really think about what each of them are doing, what their role is in the whole of this thing. But before we do that, let's just run this application and make sure that it runs. So I'm going to type .NET run, and hopefully it's going to run. I'm going to see it in my browser. Okay, we see the application has started, and it started on port 5000. So we have two URLs, one on port 5001 and one on port 5000. While we're here, I would just like to mention the reason you have two URLs is one has an S, so HTTPS, and one doesn't have an S, which is HTTP. The difference being that the one with an S is secure. So any information you send on a site that uses HTTPS, the chances that that information can be intercepted and stolen by an attacker is very minimal. So that is why when you see sites that require you to enter your card details or your personal information or your address, those sites have to be using SSL, which gives them the HTTPS URL. And then what happens when you enter your details into that site is then it takes your details and it encrypts them in a format that even if someone steals those details, it's of no use to them because it's basically scrambled. It's garbage, right? So only when it has hit the other side of the connection, that is, it has hit the application server, is it converted from that random string back to the actual representation. But when you send information over normal HTTP, what happens is the information is sent exactly in the format that you sent it. So there's no encryption, there's no randomization, nothing. So if someone on the same connection with you, maybe on your same Wi-Fi or on your same office network, can actually intercept that connection you're making to the web server before it gets to the web server and steal your information. So that's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. For now, we'll continue using the HTTP URL because we're really not doing anything super secure. And when it's time for SSL, we're going to learn about it. I'm going to come to my browser and enter my URL, and I see that my application is running. So that's all I wanted to make sure of. We're not going to make any change to this application. The goal here is just to go through the application bit by bit and see what each part does. Now, let's start from the last one here, startup.cs. Now, startup.cs, like the name implies, it's one of the core components of our web application. It's where a lot of configuration happens. It is where we tell our application how to behave, basically. So when we enter a URL in our browser, right? So we enter localhost/index/home/index, and we hit enter, and it goes to a controller. How does our application know to send this to that controller? That happens in startup.cs. So we use startup.cs to configure our web application. For example, there's a method here called configure services. There are things called services in our web application, which we're going to talk about later. But the startup.cs allows us to configure these services. And then there's another method called configure. So you begin to see that most of the things in startup.cs is really configuration. So we're telling it, hey, this is how our application should act, or this is what our application should do. Now, I'm going to come down here. Now, if you notice, I'm going to run this application again, and I need you guys to pay attention here. I'll say .NET run, and I'll just let that boot up. And I'm going to come here, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to navigate to HTTPS localhost 5001. I'm not going to specify a controller name, and I'm not going to specify an action name. I'm going to hit enter, and if you notice what happened, I get my home controller. So I get my home controller and the index action back. Index action, that's what I get back here. But I didn't tell it to go to /home/index, right? But if I hit this, I still get the same page. So either using it like this or using it with the /home/index work. And why is that? That happens because in our startup.cs, we've configured it that if a person doesn't specify a controller path or an action path, the default controller will be home and the default action will be index. Now, we're specifying it on this line. We're saying if the person enters just our application's root URL, which is localhost 5000, and they don't specify the controller they want to go to or the action they want to go to, use the home controller as a default and index as the and index as the default action. To show that this works, I'm going to add a new controller here. So I'll say new file. I'll call it arithmetic controller. I need to complete that. Arithmetic controller.cs. I'll come here and I'll create a namespace. Demo web application .controllers, and then I'll go public class arithmetic controller, just like we've done 1,000 times. Public class arithmetic controller, it's going to inherit from controller, and then I'm just going to I need a using statement here. I'm just going to take the using statements from here. I'm not going to use all of them, but I'll just take all of them and paste them here. Right? It should be controller, not controllers. Okay, so I've created an arithmetic controller. I'm going to create an action here. I'll say public I action result. So here you can use either an action result or an I action result, like I explained on the channel. So public I action result. I'm going to call this quadratic, right? So assuming that this quadratic, I can't spell quadratic. So I'm assuming that this action is going to return a view for us to calculate a quadratic equation. So return view. So I've created my controller, I've created my action. The next thing I need to do is I need to create the corresponding view, right? So I'll come in here and I'll say new folder. Now remember, the name of my folder needs to match the name of the controller. So the controller I created was arithmetic controller. So I'll create a view folder called arithmetic, and within that folder I'm going to create a view. So I'm going to say new file, and I'm going to say quadratic.cshtml. Awesome. Because I don't want to waste a lot of time, I'm simply going to take the code from the home controller, from the index controller, and I'll paste it in quadratic. I'll change the title to quadratic calculator. Alright, so I'm going to create a form and some input boxes. So for H1, I'm going to say enter the variables for the quadratic equation, and then I'm going to create a form. ASP controller should be arithmetic. Action should be quadratic. And now I can create my input element, right? So I'll say input placeholder equals enter value for a, because in a quadratic equation we know we have three variables, right? A, b, and c. So enter value for a. I'm going to make this required, and then I'm going to make the type to be a number, because we're expecting the person to enter a number here. I'm going to duplicate this. So copy this. So I'll say enter value for b, and then I'll say enter value for c. So there I'm taking all the variables for my quadratic equation. Awesome. So what's left is our submit button. I'm going to say button type equals submit, then calculate. So there, I have my view, and what's going to happen is I'm going to run this application. So first of all, I'll stop this, I'll clear my console, then I'll go .NET run, right? I'm going to stop this. So I have a typo here, enter the variables. So this should be variables. I'll save it, I'll clear this, clear, and then .NET run. Let's just give it a second. Alright, great. So I'll go back to my browser and I'll hit here. And I still have my home page. But what if I go to slash arithmetic slash quadratic? Okay, I think I just made a mistake here. ASP, I think there should be ASP action. Okay, so .NET run. Alright, so let's try this again. Alright, awesome. So I have my quadratic calculator showing. So I said enter a variable for A, enter a value for B, enter a value for C, and then calculate. Well, if we enter values now, we're just going to have the same page presented to us because, or we're going to get an error because we don't have a post controller yet. So if you remember, when you want to get values back, you need to have a post controller. So all we have right now is the get controller, but we're not even going to do that now because that's not what we're focusing on. So I have this quadratic calculator, right? But if I come to the root of my application without any slash home or slash index or slash arithmetic, what I see is my home page. Now, what if I want my quadratic page to be the first page you see when you come here without having to add slash arithmetic? I want it to be the main page of my application because at the end of the day, that is my main page. Remember the thing I told you about startup being the place where you can configure your application from? We're going to come here. So in our startup, in this app.use endpoint, we can tell our application what the default page it should go to is. And the way to do that, I'm going to change the home here, and I'm going to change it to arithmetic, and I'll change the action it's supposed to go to quadratic. Right, so right now instead of going to slash home slash index, I'm going to arithmetic quadratic, which is arithmetic and then quadratic, right? So just once again, see where I'm doing it. I'm doing it in my startup class, and then I'm going to stop the application, then clear .NET run. And hopefully this will work now. This time when I come to my application and I come to the base, I see I no longer get the home page. I'm getting my quadratic calculation page on the root, and that is how to specify which controller and which, or what's it called, which controller and which action should be the default one when you navigate to the application without any URL. So that is one of the things you can do in the startup class. It's just the startup class is very powerful. It's one of the most powerful parts of the application, but that is one of the things you can do here. Another thing that is happening here is when we have an error in our application, for example, an exception is thrown or a view is not there. For example, I'm going to comment out this action. Where's my shortcut? Okay, I'm just going to use the multi-line comment here. So this is, by the way, this is a multi-line comment if you've never used it before. So I'm just going to comment out my quadratic equation here, my quadratic, because I want the application to throw an error. So I'm going to say .NET run, and awesome. Now I'm going to come here and try to navigate to the same page, and this time I get an error. Or you know what, this is not the kind of error I was hoping to show. Let's just leave this here. So I'll uncomment this, and I'll simply come here and delete this, right? So I'll delete the view. I just deleted the view because I wanted to throw an actual exception. So I'll go .NET run again. And let's come back here and say enter. And what we're seeing is we're seeing an error here, and we're expecting this error because it's telling us, hey, we can't find the view quadratic. So it's saying, okay, we can see the action and we can see the controller, but there's no view, so we don't know what to display, right? And now I want to explain why we can see this error. Now, when you actually deploy your application for users to use, you don't want them to see details like this. So these details are personal to the developer. The user of your application does not need to know what went wrong with your application. So all you should tell them is, hey, something went wrong, but we're investigating it. They don't need to know that a view was not found, because that is too much information. It can tell an attacker things about your application that will help them attack your application. But in our startup class, we are saying, hey, if we're working on a development environment, display the exception page. So our application can tell, or rather we can configure our application to know that, okay, we are still working on this application, like this application is still under active development, and we can configure it to tell it, okay, this application is in production, like people have actually started using this web application. So what we're saying here is, if the application is in development, so if this is a development environment, if we're working on this application currently, then use the exception page. Make it possible that these kind of detailed error pages will be displayed, because then when something goes wrong, we need to know what goes wrong as developers so that we can fix it. But if it is not a development page, so if it is a user using our website, you don't need to see all these details, and so we don't enable it here. So when an actual user is using our application and it runs into a problem like this, all they're going to see is, we're sorry, an error occurred, please try again, and they don't see these detailed error pages. And we are doing it here in this configure, and these are some of the things you can do with ASP.NET Core. So when we start talking about databases, we're going to configure our database from here, and our application knows, okay, this is the database we're using. When we start using users, we're going to configure our users authentication bits from here. Okay, we can't, okay, if a user does not have this value, he can't log in, or all of that is going to happen in the startup file. So just so you know, the startup file is just like the central configuration place for your application, that you can come and configure things, configure how you expect the application to behave, configure what endpoints are the default endpoint. You see here we have something like app.use authorization. It's saying, okay, X and Y parts of this application needs to be protected, and someone has to be signed in before they can access it, and we're going to get to all of that. So that is kind of what the startup class does, right? So very quickly, I'm just going to go and recover the file I deleted. So I'll just restore it from my recycle bin. Great. Now moving on, we spent quite a lot of time on the startup class. Moving on to the program.cs class. So the program.cs class actually allows us to configure our application. So it's a configure, but it's a different kind of configuration. Remember, every C# program has a main method. I mentioned that in one of our earliest samples, earliest videos, and this is the main method for your application. When you start your application, this is actually the first piece of code that is called when you start your web application. So when you say .NET run, it looks for this function called main, and this is where your application starts execution from. And what you see here is create web host builder, blah blah blah. You don't have to worry about all of this yet. But the important part is we're saying web builder.use startup, and we're passing that startup file. Remember, the startup file contains all the configuration of how we want our application to behave. So we have an use startup file, and we're saying, hey, immediately the application comes up, use the startup file and use all the configuration from there to create our website. That's that. And then this is a CS storage file. So even in our console application, we have a CS storage file, and all the CS storage file does is it tells the .NET Core framework what kind of application we're using. So we're building here. So according to this CS storage file, we're building a Microsoft .NET.SDK.web application, and it says we're using the .NET Core version 3.1. The different versions of .NET Core, it says here we're using the 3.1 version, and generally you wouldn't have to worry about this file too much, at least for now. We're going to move on now to app settings.json. So app settings.json basically allows us to put configuration settings that we're going to use later in our program. So for example, you need to connect to a database, or you need somewhere to save an admin password, or you need somewhere just to save a key or access token or things like that. So basically you put things like that here. We're not using a database, right? I'm going to assume we're using a database, and I'm going to just say database connection string, and I'm going to type some connection string, right? And what I'm doing here is this is obviously not the connection string, but this is the format that this application uses, and I can put an actual connection string to a database here. And when my application needs to talk to a database, I just say, hey application, do you remember the value I saved as database connection string? And it's going to say yes, and I'm going to say, okay, give me that value. I'm going to use this name to say give me the value of the connection string, and then it's going to give me this connection string. Now, one reason to use these settings files or this JSON file is that because we're putting our application into GitHub, sometimes we don't want certain information to go to GitHub, right? Now, assume we're working with a GitHub repository that is not private, a public GitHub repository, right? And we have passwords to certain services that we're using. Maybe we're sending emails with our application, so we have our Gmail password here. We don't want everyone to see our Gmail password, so we put that information in this app settings file, and we exclude this file from GitHub. So we have a way to exclude this file, so every time we push to GitHub, this particular file is not pushed, because then we don't want people to see our personal, and that is what the configuration file does. There's another one called app settings.development.json. So you can have identical values. Now, you can have identical values in both of them, but then going back to what I said about environment and being able to show error screen to some people, to you as a developer, and not showing those error screens to other people, it's basically the same thing. So I can have this same database connection string in my app settings.development.json. And what happens when I run this application as a developer is that it's going to use I'm going to use some developer connection string. It's not going to use the same database that my users are using, because I don't want to tamper with that database. I might be working against it and I'll mistakenly delete some data, which is terrible. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, hey, whenever I am running this application as a developer or in development mode, I'm still using the same database connection string, but when I ask for the database connection string, don't give me the one to my live database, to the one with my actual users. Give me the development database I have set up for testing, so then I am not messing with people's data. And so that is the difference between these two files. We can put the same values in both of them, but the value of these configuration parameters are going to differ between what we're using in our development environment and what we're using in other places. Now I'm going to close up some of these files to reduce the clutter, and we can continue. So we have a www root folder here, and a lot of you have been asking, oh, how do I style my application? Where's the CSS, where's the JavaScript, where's the HTML? And all of that resides in the www root folder. And we have a CSS folder and the site.css. Now most of us know what CSS is. CSS is used for styling our application, and if you feel like the site doesn't look good and you'd like to use your own CSS, all you have to do is simply come in here and add your CSS, basically define your own CSS and use it in your application. Now for JavaScript, same thing. You just come in here, and currently there's no JavaScript on our site. Or if you want some cool JavaScript to do some animation and all of that, you come in here and you add your JavaScript. And then there's this lib folder. We're using Bootstrap now, so the Bootstrap lives in this lib folder. We're using jQuery. If you don't understand what all of this is, you really don't have to worry about it as a backend developer, or you don't have to worry too much about it rather. Or these are just really CSS and JavaScript files which can make the front end of our application look better. So we've covered the www root. We can have a folder called images here in our www root folder, which is going to hold images we're going to use in our application and all of that. And that brings us to the views folder, right? In our views folder, we already know what the view folder is. The view folder holds views that are actually rendered in our application, and the view folder is broken into folders which correspond to controller names. So we have the arithmetic for the arithmetic controller. We have the home for the home controller, and then we have this one, shared. We've really never talked about the shared. So what is the shared? I'll show you something. The application is stopped now. I'm going to run the application, and I want to show you something. .NET run. Okay, our application is running now. I'm going to navigate to our application, and I'm going to come to our quadratic view. And if you noticed, all we've defined in our quadratic view is enter the variables for the quadratic equation, and then we have our form. But then when we come here, we see that we have a header, we have a footer. So we have a header which says demo web application, we have home, we have privacy, and then we have a footer which says C 2020 and all of this. Now, where is all of this coming from? They're not in our view. We haven't displayed. These are the only things we've created in our view. This label or this text and these text boxes. So where is all of this cool navigation bar? Where is all of this coming from? And the thing is, they're coming from this shared folder, right? And when you're building an application, there's certain parts of your view that you're going to reuse. For example, let's see what facebook.com looks like. I hope this is a good example. Okay, so this is my Facebook page, right? And this is the header, right? This part that's showing my name and showing search Facebook. And if I click on my groups, we see that I still have my header here, right? And if I click on this, so it doesn't matter what page I navigate to, I need to have this header. Same thing in my application. So whether I navigate to home or I navigate to privacy, I still have my header. And we can define this header inside of each of our view page. So I could define this header here, and then I'll go to the home page and define the header. Or because I know that this header is going to be used across multiple pages, I can put it in a special kind of file called a layout file. So the layout file defines the skeleton of the application. So the layout file defines the top of the application and the bottom of the application, and then your view file just defines what is going to be in between. And that's what we're doing here. So I have my layout file here, and it's pretty large, and then we can see demo application here, and we're finally seeing where this demo application is coming from on the title. And then we're going to scroll down. If you've done any HTML, we see that we have a nav bar, and you don't have to worry about all of this so much if you don't understand what it is. But we have a nav bar here, and on our nav bar we have demo application, demo web application, and that is what we have here. That is what we have here, demo web application. And then we have home and we have privacy, which are links. So these are links that can take us to other pages, and that's it here, home, privacy. And then we now have something called, this is a very special bit of code called render body, and we're going to come back to it. But let's look at the bottom. So at the bottom we have C. This actually turns into the C symbol with a circle around it, 2020 demo web application. So we have it down here and we're saying C 2020 demo web application. And so this class, this view underscore layout.html in our shared folder is basically saying, hey, this is what a page is going to look like, the header and the footer. And the truth is we can create a sidebar too that all our pages are going to have. And then this render body then says, okay, this is the layout. Now take whatever view is defined by the independent view and put it within this layout. And so this is what this render body does. It is this render body that is responsible for taking this code that we defined. So what the render body does is it takes this code and it puts it within this layout or between this layout. And that is why when we navigate to home/privacy, what it actually does is it constructs the page. So it takes the layout file and it takes whatever code is coming from our view that we're going to at the moment, and it just kind of puts it between the layout file. And in that way, we can then reshare, we can share this HTML. So let's say we need another hyperlink. So currently we have the home and the privacy. Let's say we want people to be able to navigate to our calculator page. Let's just add another link here. I'm going to leave, so it's saying, hey, the controller it's going to is the home controller. I'm going to change from home controller to arithmetic. So I'm going to say I want this to go to the arithmetic controller, and I want this to go to the quadratic action, right? And then I'm going to say the text I want it to display. I want it to display quadratic calculator, right? And then I'm going to open up my terminal. I'll stop the application running and I'll say .NET run. Okay, so our application is running. So I'm just going to come back here, and now if you notice at the top I have home, privacy, and then quadratic calculator now. And no matter what page I go to, quadratic calculator is always going to be at the top because that layout file is shared. If I go to privacy, I see that I have quadratic calculator there. I can click on quadratic calculator to come here. If I click on it again, I'm going to navigate to the same page, and that really is how this works, right? So that is what is shared. So when you have HTML that you want to be shared across multiple pages, for example, you might want to show something like log out or log in up here. That's going to show on all the pages. Your layout page is the path, is the place for all of that. And so that is what the shared folder does. There's view start, view import. We're going to just leave all of this for now. What's important here is the layout page. So that is what the layout page does. If you've been wondering where this extra markup that we didn't define come from, it comes from the layout page, and you can change it. And you also apply your style sheets from the layout page. Now see, the HTML, the CSS is actually imported here. So if you've done some HTML and you're familiar with CSS, we're actually importing the CSS in our layout file because then it's going to be available to all other pages. We're importing our bootstrap from our layout file, and that's that with that. So we already know what this, so that's with a view folder. I'm going to close all of this, and then we have the properties folder. You're not going to be working too much with this, but sometimes you want to change the ports your application runs on. So currently, when we start our application starts on port 5001 and port 5000. And why does it start on these ports? Those ports are not special, right? It can as well have started on any port. But when you create a new project, ASP.NET generates a project template for you, and it uses this port as the default template. Now the truth is, your system has 65,000 unique ports. So these numbers can be whatever you want them to be. And if you feel like you need to change the port, maybe you already have an application running on a certain port on your system and you want to use a different port for this app, you simply come in here. I'm going to change this port to 4000 or 4030, and I'll change the HTTP one to 6745. It doesn't matter. And then I'm going to run this application. So I'll say Ctrl C, clear.net run, and let's see what happens here. Now this time your application is started on port 6543 and port 4030. Right, so I'm going to take this URL and confirm that I can still hit my application, and there it still works. Everything still works, and now the port I am hitting is port 4030. So if you ever feel like you need to change the ports your application is running on, you simply have to come in here. Now remember that thing I told you about the environment? Currently, when you hit .NET Run, it sets your environment to development. So your application runs in development mode. That is why you see you see those detailed error messages. When you're done working on your application and you need to deploy your application to maybe a server or a web host, and you don't want those detailed errors to show, all you have to do is change development to production, and suddenly it doesn't use your connection strings from the development settings. It doesn't display those detailed error messages. If something wrong happens, it just says, hey, something happened, can you please try again in a few minutes. So that is where you change the environment. And there's a lot of things you can do with the launch settings file, but this is some of the most common, and this is what is important for you to know now. And that's that. The object folder is really a folder that is generated when we run our application, and we really don't need to talk so much about it now, so we're just going to ignore it. Then we have a models folder. We're going to I mentioned that MVC, which is what we're doing here, is model view controller. We've seen our view, we've seen our controller. We still haven't really talked about models, but we're going to come back to that. And then the controller folder. So we've worked a lot with controllers, and we know what goes in the controller folder. We know about what happens with actions and how they return views, and that's that. And then the bin folder is an auto-generated folder too, and it really, so we don't have to talk about this now. It's generated when you run your project. You really have to work with it, so we can just ignore it now. And that really is just a run through of the different parts of an ASP.NET Core web application. If you don't get this on first try, I beg you to finish this video, then run it again, and actually listen to go through each of the steps, listen to what different files do and how they do it, and it's basically going to make you a better developer. So when things are not working, you know which part of your application to go to fix that stuff. If you try to run your application and it tells you, oh, this port is already taken, or oh, I can't bind to this port, you know that all you have to do is to go to your properties and your launch settings and change the ports you're using. Because the truth is that there are a lot of application running on your system at any given time, and any of them can bind to any ports. So any of them can bind to any port at any particular time. I can't remember what command shows which application is using a port at any specific time. There's a command for it. I'll just Google it real fast. Check. Assigned ports Windows. Okay, yeah, so net starts N. So I'm just going to clear this, and I'll go net start -N. And I see that there are different applications running on different ports on my system. So there's an application running on port 1928, there's one running on port 1996. And so let's see what's going to happen. I'm going to come here and say I want to run an application, my application on port 2768 because I know it is being used. 2768. I'll save, then I'll say .NET run. Yeah, so it actually runs. I was supposed to get an error here. Actually works. Oh, let's try one of this. So it says this is actually closed. Let's try 1928. So I'm saying here I want you to start this application on port 1928. I'll clear and say .NET run. Okay, so look, it has given me an error now, unable to bind to port 1928. So it says unable. So it's in here I can't bind to this port, and the reason it's getting this error is because something else is using that port. I don't know what. But at any point in time, a lot of things are running on your system and they're using different ports. And so when you get this kind of error, you know that what you need to do is to come in here. And so let's stop the application and change the ports I am running on. I'm going to say I want to run on port 8. And then I'm going to go .NET run again. Oh, this is an invalid port. So remember I said 65,000. That's the number of ports you have. So from I think 0 to 69,000 or so. Now my application has started on port 6809. I just want to come back here. I'll clear this and I'll run the command again. Let's start in and let's see if we can find our application. No, we can't find our application here. What's the port again? 680. Okay, no, we can't find the application here. I can't remember how to get all the network interfaces on your system, but that just kind of solves the problem. So, you know, okay, if I can't latch to a particular port, I just have to change the port in my log settings to JSON, and that's kind of what I hope to achieve with this video. So yeah, that's it. If you noticed, I started a quadratic calculator in this project. So in our next video, we're just going to complete a calculator. So the aim is, so given a quadratic formula, we should be able to enter in our variables A, B, and C, and actually solve that quadratic formula and give a person an answer. And we're going to do that in the next video. See you guys. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.